Hello and welcome to Trade Routes at PCB. This is your update on international trade for April 4th, 2025. My name is Gina Cruz and I'll be your host for today. On Wednesday, April 2nd, the U.S. government announced the implementation of global reciprocal tariffs. This includes a 10% baseline on all imports from all countries aside from Canada and Mexico. For all other foreign goods, there are additional reciprocal tariffs based on countries' tariffs charged to the U.S. Additionally, Canada's Prime Minister announced on April 3rd the imposition of 25% reciprocal tariffs on vehicle imports from the U.S. With each episode of Trade Routes, we will be bringing in expert guests who can speak to the topics at hand. Today, I'm joined by two of our experts in the world of international trade, Brianna Leninger, Vice President of U.S. Operations, who was recently featured in the Wall Street Journal, and Gloria Terhar, who is our regulatory analyst in our Canadian operations. So Brianna and Gloria, hello and welcome back to Trade Routes.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for having us again.
Brianna, I'm going to jump right in here. Can you give us an update on yesterday's announcements and where we stand with U.S. tariffs?
There was definitely a lot to unpack from yesterday's announcement. So some of the high points is, as you noted, all countries had a 10% flat tariff put, but there was also about 59 other countries that had those additional reciprocal tariffs. And that really varies depending on what the balance of trade was in those countries. There was also kind of an extending of not necessarily that pause. I would say in some cases that pause came off. That allows for Canadian goods that are eligible for USMCA to continue to come in duty free. There was some worry that the 25% was going to be put back on those goods, but that didn't happen. It was just kind of indefinitely extended. And then as well as kind of some additional clarification on some of the orders, such as autos, steel and aluminum, and the anticipated removal of de minimis for goods coming in from China.
Thank you, Brianna. Gloria, can you give us an update on the Canadian surtax on U.S. goods and any newly announced tariffs on auto imports?
So my update's a little bit less comprehensive than Brianna's at this point because we're still waiting for official publication of exactly how the auto tariffs that Prime Minister Carney announced this morning. So what we do know from that announcement is that he's verbally advised there'll be 25% on U.S. autos. There will be an exemption based on originating content, and that we aren't planning on applying tariffs to automotive parts. But exactly how all of this will be implemented is still pending the order in council that will be issued by the Canadian government.
Just to clarify, is that on new and U.S. parts and autos?
New end use, absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. So since this announcement yesterday, we've had an influx of questions, including inquiries from multiple news networks regarding the implications of these tariffs and what this entails for trade going forward. So our goal today is to provide our viewers with details of the recent tariff announcements, provide useful insight into some of the recurring questions we're receiving, and discuss what this announcement could mean for you as an importer. So let's get started with some of the questions that we've had coming to our hotline, which for listeners is 888-908-6638, or via email tariffquestions@pcbglobaltrade.com. So to both of you, are the U.S. tariffs stacking? I guess, Brie, that's to you.
Yeah, they are stacking a little bit, especially in the cases when you look at China, who, they have numerous anti-dumping countervailing orders. They also have Section 301 duties. Along when Canada and Mexico got the 25%, China also got an additional 20%. That was a separate order. And then you also have this new, 36% range that's come in. You're going to see, depending on the commodity, multiple trade actions be imposed on the goods, but it does vary by commodity. A lot of the 301 orders had a lot of exemptions. I think the biggest part of it that hit China was definitely that removal of de minimis that's going to be coming at the beginning of May. But yeah, you're going to see that stacking. We're seeing stacking a lot in goods that have both steel and aluminum content in them, because the content for steel has to be declared, the content for aluminum has to be declared, but then also the product itself has to be declared. And so that's when you start to see that type of stacking, especially if that kind of mixed composite good isn't eligible for, say, like USMCA. You're going to have your baseline tariff, and then you're going to have those additional trade tariff actions on top of those.
So it could add up.
Yeah, I wouldn't go in thinking that you're just going to get a base rate, right? It's just going to be 25%. I would really look into your commodities to see how many trade actions are impacting that commodity and what your kind of total landed duty rate is going to be.
Okay. Will goods qualifying under USMCA or CUSMA continue to be exempt from the current tariffs?
Yes. So right now, they're even exempt from the 10%. So I think that's important to note because it was a little bit misleading at the top where it said 10% on all countries. There was an exception made for Canada and Mexico. So if those goods do qualify for USMCA, CUSMA, or TMEX, they are going to continue to get that preferential 0%, most of the time 0% duty rate. Really, the trade action is focused at those goods from those two countries that don't qualify under USMCA.
And is that for the steel and aluminum as well, or does that go on top of the USMCA?
That's over on above.
Okay. What is the regional value content and why is it important to understand for U.S. imports?
So regional value content is probably a term that nobody knew what it was until most recently when you start looking at eligibility. Regional value content, so USMCA, they require that a certain amount of the components in an article be manufactured or be derived, grown, produced in North America. And so where that really matters is a lot of times people will think that just because something is manufactured in Canada or the US or Mexico, that it automatically qualifies for the free trade agreement, and it doesn't. Many products have to meet that regional value content in order to meet eligibility. And it's become a really big topic lately because it's really being targeted. And it's really being looked at. Whenever there's a potential revenue loss to the government, they're always going to really get into those fine nitty-gritty details. So if you are currently making a claim, I would highly recommend going back and making sure that you really are meeting those eligibility requirements because they're going to be asking questions on them. But if you're not making that claim, then on the other side, I highly recommend that you look at your product and see if maybe you can get some duty savings by making that USMCA.
If it's eligible.
Yeah.
And you can't just buy things in one country and that's not part of the content. That's manufactured, grown, or produced.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there new reporting requirements and data needed for a customs release?
Yeah, there's quite a bit. The entry process has definitely gotten a lot thicker. Just kind of for an example, for every one of these trade actions, it's an additional HTS number that has to be declared. The tariff pick is only so wide and it's only so long. And so they have to find a way to really get these individual country measures in place. But a lot of these orders, like the steel and aluminum, they're really hammering in on additional information. And so you have to have mill certs or melt and pour certs for those commodities. But there was an additional allowance in the US and really for these duties that if 20% of the good has US origin, you may only be paying the 10% or whatever the reciprocal rate is on the foreign content. And so that is another reason why regional value content has become such a hot topic in the last 24 hours is because there may be other ways to find duty savings when you kind of look at and your manufacturing process, your component process.
And that's where our trade advisory comes in.
Absolutely.
They can break that down for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Are the previously implemented tariffs on steel, aluminum, auto, and auto parts still in place?
Autos went in last night. Auto parts are set to go in at the beginning of May.
Gloria?
I just wanted to interject that the current Canadian tariffs are still in place. There wasn't any changes made to those yet.
But there may be soon.
Potentially, yes. There was Canada did have a consultation open that's been open since the start of March that the public was able to give their opinion to the government on these additional tariff items that Canada may levy a tariff against. That closed last night. So there's a potential for additional tariffs. But
And we'll keep everyone posted as we learn them.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be very targeted and in response to US tariffs.
We've got one more question. This is where we're getting a lot of, where can we get help? Where can we find the tariff classifications? What tools are available? And I know you both will have an answer. So let's start with you, Bree.
Definitely leaning on service providers who specialize in this stuff, right? I mean, we were all up until the wee hours of the morning, really digging into the fine details, trying to see what advantages we could find for importers and exporters. There is a lot of content online where you can look, but really with the variance and the breadth of information, seeking out trade advisory, reaching reaching out to your customs broker, reaching out to the trade professionals that are available is really your best path forward for navigating kind of what hit yesterday.
There's legal rules to tariff classification that have to be followed, and we're experts in that. It's not as simple as picking up that big book or going to the respective government websites and hitting Control F search for your item. That doesn't generally yield a good result when you're audited to confirm that your tariff classification and therefore tariffs are correct.
And this is different service than our day-to-day filing operation for
Correct.
shipments crossing the border. This is over and above and deeper diving into compliance, basically to keep you compliant, out off the radar of customs, making sure you're claiming correctly. And, 6 months down the road, you're confident knowing you're not going to have any issues.
And just to add one more thing, I mean, it is an investment because if you do it wrong, the cost of error in a high duty environment is enormous because it's not just, okay, now you have to pay the duty. It's you have to pay the duty plus interest plus potentially a penalty. And so a little bit of investment up front in just setting your processes, understanding what's required for your product is one, going to help your goods move across ports of entry much more efficiently, right? You want to ask that question before it hits the port of entry and not when it's at the port of entry. But it also can save you a lot of money and a lot of time down the road. That can be really beneficial in this trading environment.
So what are the things they have available? Trade relief?
Drawback is not eligible for these duties. There's no drawback option, but some of the programs or service offerings that people would really benefit from is, one, looking at your tariff classifications, making sure that they're sound, looking at your country of origin, especially with these reciprocal tariffs, targeting certain countries, really making sure that you're making that right country of origin determination. But the top one that's really going to help, I think, right now is that service to look at your USMCA or free trade agreement eligibility. That's where that first savings is really going to come in. And in that, we also look at tariff classification and origin because those are key components to seeing if you qualify for a free trade agreement. Definitely looking for rulings. There's a really big host of services, but those are the top ones right now. A supply chain audit, I think, would be another one that would really benefit people right now with everything that's happening.
And Gloria, the same in Canada?
In Canada, drawback is actually available on surtaxes. So there's always that opportunity. There are considerations that have to be made to that, though. If you further manufactured the item, then you've got a much more complicated process in being able to prove the inputs that you're putting into that item and then that are being exported. You can apply for a specific remission to the Canadian government. We can help with that application to see if you meet the conditions, and we can help you craft a persuasive argument to see if you can get a company-specific remission.
For people who don't know, what is a remission?
Remission is an application to not pay the surtax at time of importation. The Canadian Duty Relief Program, if an importer already has a duty relief license that's issued by CBSA, also applies to the surtaxes.
So do you have to be a current client to engage us for trade advisory?
Anyone can. We certainly, if you come to us, we can get you set up to be able to provide. So I don't think there's any restrictions on that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can come in and get you set up and get you the help that you need.
Surely, because in this time, it's hard to make a change for your broker with as much chaos going on as it is. So we can support.
And that is important to note. You don't necessarily have to change brokers to get trade advisory services. There's a lot of companies that diversify, and there's a lot of companies that use both services.
So thank you for joining me today for all this discussion on international trade. It was very informative, and I look forward to any updates in the days and months to come. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at tariffquestions@pcbglobaltrade.com. They could be answered here next time. As always, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook so you don't miss any of these updates as they come in. And hit the subscribe button so you get updates on these sessions as we record them. Thank you, ladies. Until next time, this is Trade Roots.